Black billionaire laughed at for using black card at hotel. Cancels 3.8B. Deal on the spot. Is this some kind of joke? The hotel clerk sneered, holding up the matte black credit card like it was counterfeit. We don't take novelty cards here, sir. Julian Moore stood there, calm and composed in his dark tailored jacket, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the woman behind the counter. Young, white, her name tag read Courtney, as her co-worker tried not to laugh beside her. That's an American Express Centurion, Julian said, his tone measured. You've seen one before, right? Courtney gave a short, sarcastic chuckle. Oh, I know what it's supposed to be. But we've had people try to flash fake ones before, especially around events like these. Behind him, the lobby buzzed with activity. The Renaissance Carlton in Manhattan was hosting a prestigious tech investment summit, and the place was crawling with entrepreneurs, VCs, and analysts. But the moment had gone quiet around Julian. Other guests began to glance in his direction. You think I'm pretending to be someone important? Julian asked, his voice lower now, his gaze firm. Courtney scoffed. Sir, if you can't provide a valid form of payment, we're going to have to ask you to leave the check-in area. Julian's assistant, Maya Torres, stepped forward. This is ridiculous. That card has no limit. He owns... Julian raised a hand to silence her. He looked at Courtney, then around at the crowd that had started to form, a mix of confusion, curiosity, and thinly veiled amusement. He gave a single nod. Fine, Julian said. Cancel the reservation. Courtney blinked. Wait, what? Julian turned to Maya. Get Mr. Levy on the phone. Now. We're not staying here tonight. Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped away, already dialing. Courtney leaned over the counter. Sir, I didn't say... You already said enough, Julian replied. You didn't verify my ID. You didn't even run the card. You saw a black man with a Centurion card and decided it couldn't be real. By now, a few people had pulled out phones. Someone muttered, Is that? Courtney's manager, a balding man in a maroon vest, rushed over. Is there a problem here? Yes, Julian said. But don't worry. I'm handling it. The manager opened his mouth, but Maya walked back over, holding her phone toward Julian. Mr. Levy's on. Julian took the call. Adam, it's Julian. You know that hospitality deal we're finalizing with Carlton Holdings? Pull it. All of it. There was a stunned silence. Even Courtney froze. Yes, Julian continued. Tell legal to kill the deal. I don't care about the penalties. We're not investing $3.8 billion in a brand that treats its guests like this. He ended the call. Courtney's face had turned white. Wait, sir, you're Julian Moore, the Julian Moore. Julian finally smiled, just slightly. I was... Until about 10 minutes ago. Then he turned and walked out of the lobby, Maya close behind. The story of a billionaire being humiliated over a black card would go viral that evening. But what no one had seen yet, what no one expected, was that this was just the beginning. The next morning, the world had caught fire. Julian's name trended on every social platform, splashed across headlines. Black billionaire humiliated at luxury hotel, cancels multi-billion-dollar deal. News outlets ran footage from the lobby, showing Julian calmly making the call to shut down the entire Carlton Holdings deal, while a stunned hotel manager looked on. Within hours, Carlton's stock had dipped 5%. By noon, it had lost over $1 billion in market cap. But Julian didn't care about the market. He cared about the principle. Sitting in the back seat of his black Maybach, Julian scrolled through messages on his phone. His inbox was packed. Apologies, statements, damage control. Carlton Holdings' CEO had called 3 times. He didn't answer once. Across from him, Maya looked up from her tablet. They just released a formal apology. But they didn't mention your name once. Julian didn't even blink. Of course not. They're not sorry about what happened. They're sorry it went viral. Maya nodded. Should I draft a response? No, he said flatly. I'm not giving them airtime. But I want a meeting set up with the Diversity Council at Bloomberg and reach out to the NAACP. Let's redirect our investment somewhere that matters. Maya's eyebrows lifted. All 3.8 billion. Julian turned to look at her. Every cent. The car slowed as it pulled up in front of another building, a boutique hotel in Harlem, a far cry from the marble floors and towering chandeliers of the Renaissance Carlton, but Julian liked it that way. It was black-owned, discreet, and had heart. Inside, Julian was greeted like family. The owner, Ms. Loretta Jean, gave him a warm hug. Baby, we saw the news. Can't believe they tried you like that. Julian smiled for the first time that day. They did me a favor, Loretta. She eyed him knowingly. You here to hide or to plan? A little of both, he said, walking with her toward the elevator. In his suite upstairs, Julian stood by the window, overlooking the heartbeat of Harlem. His mind buzzed, not with anger, but strategy. This wasn't the first time he'd been judged before speaking. It was just the loudest. Across town, Carlton Holdings executives were in chaos. The CFO barked orders to legal. We're facing breach of contract. Do you understand that? But CEO Ryan Hartley wasn't listening. He was staring at the footage again, frame by frame. Why didn't anyone recognize him? He's on Forbes, for God's sake! Courtney, the clerk who'd laughed at Julian, sat stiff in HR. Her face was pale, lips trembling. I didn't know who he was. That's not the point, snapped the HR director. Would you have treated him differently if he wasn't famous? Courtney looked down, silent. Meanwhile, back in Harlem, Maya entered Julian's suite holding a folder. You need to see this. He took the folder and opened it. Inside were screenshots, records, comments from employees of Carlton, some defending the incident, others confirming similar treatment toward guests of color. One comment stood out, written by a junior employee. He was just another black guy, acting rich. She thought he was bluffing. Julian exhaled slowly. So this isn't just about me. No, Maya said. It's a culture problem. That was when something shifted in Julian's mind. The decision to cancel the deal wasn't just personal anymore. It was purposeful. He turned to Maya. I want names, I want patterns, and I want to know how deep this goes. You thinking lawsuit? He shook his head. No, I'm thinking exposure. Later that night, in a dimly lit boardroom uptown, Julian met with 3 other black executives, leaders from tech, media, and finance. He laid out the footage, the internal data Maya had pulled, and a plan. A bigger one. We've been silent too long, he said. They use our money, our minds, our presence, and still look down at us. That ends here. What do you want to do? Asked Carla Rivers, head of a billion-dollar equity firm. Buy them out, Julian said. Then clean house. There was silence. Then a slow grin spread across Carla's face. Now that's the Julian Moore I know. By the end of the meeting, the beginnings of a private equity strike were in motion, but Julian knew the public wouldn't see that yet. First, they'd see the pain, then the power. And somewhere inside the Carlton Hotel's PR office, a junior assistant burst into the executive suite, breathless. You're not going to believe this. She held up her phone. On the screen was an open letter, freshly posted to Julian's verified X account. I've been judged for the color of my skin more times than I can count. But this time, it cost someone 3.8 billion. Let that sink in. The internet exploded, but for Julian Moore, It was just step one. It was nearly midnight when the first call came through. Julian sat on the edge of his bed in the Harlem hotel, his phone glowing in the dim light. The name on the screen: Ryan Hartley, CEO of Carlton Holdings. He didn't answer. The second call came 5 minutes later. Then an email. Then a text. Julian stared at the screen for a long moment before tossing the phone onto the nightstand. "Now he wants to talk," he muttered. Outside, the street buzzed faintly with life. From his window, he could see a group of teens on bikes weaving through traffic, real life. Not the pristine, sterile world of corporate boardrooms where men like Hartley thought they controlled everything. Maya walked in, holding a manila folder. "You're going to want to see this." Julian opened the folder and found a printed email chain, internal messages from Carlton employees. She had redacted the names, but the tone was unmistakable. One message read, "That guy was probably a scammer. Who even uses a black card without a reservation?" Another added, "Courtney did what we all would have done." Better safe than sorry, right? Julian's jaw tightened. They don't even realize what they're saying. "That's the scary part," Maya said quietly. "They think they're being reasonable." He stood up, pacing. "I don't want another apology. I want accountability." "Then you'll love this," she added, pulling out another document. "An anonymous employee just came forward. Says Carlton HR buried 3 separate racial discrimination complaints over the past year. They all involved Courtney." Julian stopped cold. 3? Minimum. All swept under the rug. That was the turning point. The narrative wasn't just about a billionaire being disrespected. It was about a pattern. A systemic rot. The next morning, Julian called a press conference. Reporters gathered in a modest Harlem community center, buzzing with curiosity. Everyone expected a slick statement or a well-worded PR move. What they got instead was Julian Moore standing in front of a wooden podium, wearing a plain black suit and no tie, flanked by Maya and 2 civil rights attorneys. He didn't read a speech. He didn't need one. "Let me tell you a story," he began, voice steady. "Last week, I walked into a hotel I was helping to finance through a multi-billion-dollar deal. I was treated like a criminal for using my own credit card, not because of how I acted, but because of how I looked." A murmur swept through the crowd. "I thought canceling that deal would be enough. But it turns out this wasn't an isolated mistake. It's a culture." "And I'm not here to fix their culture. I'm here to expose it." He held up the folder of internal emails. "These are employee statements. Some defending the behavior, some confirming that this kind of treatment is common. What makes this different is that I had the money and the platform to respond." But most people don't. Then he stepped aside as Maya handed the microphone to one of the former Carlton employees, Tasha Grant, a former front desk supervisor who had filed one of the buried complaints. Tasha took a deep breath before speaking. "I was told to stop making everything about race. When I spoke up, they demoted me. Then forced me out." Her voice cracked slightly. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me, but Mr. Moore gave me that chance." The room went silent. The fallout was swift. By noon, 3 major clients announced they were pulling out of Carlton Holdings. A prominent senator tweeted her support of Julian's call for accountability. HR documents began to leak anonymously. Public pressure surged. And in the middle of it all, Courtney was put on administrative leave. But for Julian, that wasn't justice. That was PR. He sat with Maya that afternoon, sifting through more statements. "We're just scratching the surface," she said. "What you did, what you're doing, is starting a wave. People are coming forward. They feel seen." Julian stared out the window, then leaned back in his chair. This was never about getting revenge. I just want to make sure the next young black man walking into a hotel lobby doesn't get sized up like a suspect. Maya smiled faintly. You're not just canceling a deal anymore. You're rewriting the rules. But just as the conversation settled, Julian's phone buzzed again, a known number. He answered. This is Moore. A voice on the line said, Mr. Moore, this is Deborah Langston from the Department of Justice. We'd like to speak with you about Carlton Holdings. We've been monitoring them for a while. Julian's eyebrows lifted. I'm listening. We believe your story might be the final piece we need to open a formal investigation into their discriminatory practices. Would you be willing to assist us? He didn't hesitate. Set up the meeting. As he hung up, Maya stared at him. That sounded serious. Julian nodded slowly, a fire in his eyes. It is. What began as a moment of humiliation had become something far greater. A reckoning. And Julian Moore was no longer playing defense. He was going after the system. The suite at the Corwin Hotel was empty now, but the echo of what had happened days ago still lingered in Julian's mind. He stood in the center of the room, staring at the spot where Courtney had first questioned his card. The concierge who now escorted him in was apologetic, careful, overly polite. Every word came out like it had been run through a PR filter. This suite is reserved indefinitely for your use, Mr. Moore. On behalf of our entire team, please accept our sincerest. Julian raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Don't say it, he said flatly. The concierge blinked. Sir? I'm not here for a gesture or a comped room. I'm here because I want to see exactly where the cracks are. Julian wasn't interested in damage control. He was collecting evidence, memories, patterns. Back downstairs, Maya was waiting in the lounge. She had flown in 2 days ago from DC, a stack of files under one arm and fire in her eyes. She'd spent the past 48 hours calling former employees, clients, and quietly slipping a few names to journalists. You were right, she said as he sat beside her. Courtney's not the only one. Turns out Carlton Holdings has had 6 similar incidents. Different cities, different faces, same story. Julian looked out the window where the sun spilled golden light across the sidewalk. You ever wonder how many people they humiliated who couldn't fight back? Maya gave a slight nod. Every day. He leaned forward. Then we bring them in. What do you mean? I want them to tell their stories, all of them, on record. Maya's brows rose. You're building a case. No, he corrected. I'm building a movement. That night, Julian hosted a private gathering at the Langston Cultural Center, the same venue where his mother used to volunteer as a young woman, raising awareness for civil rights causes. The walls were lined with photographs of black activists, entrepreneurs, musicians, and artists, centuries of resilience. The people who walked in weren't corporate executives. They were bellhops, housekeepers, teachers, nurses. Some wore old uniforms, others brought photos. All of them carried the same expression, weary but defiant. Tasha Grant returned and brought 2 other former employees who had experienced similar humiliations. Then came David Lester, a delivery driver in Houston who had been denied a hotel room because he didn't look like he belonged. Then Amina Washington, a single mother from Detroit, who was refused entry to a fundraising gala, even though her name was printed on the invitation. They didn't yell. They didn't cry. They spoke. One by one, they stood up and told their stories. Raw, vulnerable, and undeniable. And when Julian finally rose to speak, the room fell quiet again. I'm not asking for sympathy, he began. I'm not interested in their next apology or their next polished statement. I want change, measurable, enforceable change. Because what happened to me has been happening to us. Quietly, repeatedly. And now, not anymore. That speech went viral overnight. By morning, "We Belong Here" was trending on social media. Local news anchors shared clips of the community gathering, praising Julian not just for exposing the discrimination, but for elevating the voices most often ignored. But not everyone was pleased. At 8:17 a.m. the next day, Maya received a warning, an encrypted message from a source inside the DOJ. "Be careful. Carlton's lawyers are preparing a counter-narrative. They've hired a private investigator. They're digging into Julian's past." Maya rushed to find him. "You need to know what they're doing," she said. "They're not just playing defense anymore." Julian smiled grimly. "Of course they're not. They're scared. This could get ugly," she warned. "They'll try to smear you." "Twist your past. Frame this like you're waging a vendetta because of ego." "Let them try," Julian said. "Every lie they tell will make the truth ring louder." But what he didn't expect was what came next. That afternoon, the headlines shifted. Not about Carlton, not about Courtney, but about him. Julian Moore's military past raises questions. Billionaire's early business ties under scrutiny. One headline claimed he received government funding through questionable means. Another hinted at tax irregularities in his early years, nothing criminal, but enough to fuel speculation. Julian slammed the newspaper on the table. "They're trying to discredit everything I built." Maya stayed calm. "You knew this would come, but we've got truth on our side." Transparency wins. "But will it matter?" he asked bitterly. "People love a good takedown story more than they love justice." Maya paused. "Then we beat them at their own game." "Not by hiding, by telling your story ourselves." They agreed to release a full personal statement that evening. Julian would go live. No script, no PR spin, just his voice and the truth. That night, he looked into the camera and said, "Yes, I came from nothing. Yes, I made mistakes, but every dollar I earned, every door I opened, I did it with integrity. I didn't inherit this power. I earned it, and now I'm using it for those who never had the chance." And then, calmly, he said, "I'm not perfect. But I am undeniable, and this fight is just beginning." The comments exploded with support. The smear campaign backfired. And across the country, for every person trying to silence Julian Moore, there were hundreds more ready to raise their voices beside him. Julian stood by the window of his penthouse suite, staring down at the city that once welcomed him with open arms. Now, its skyline felt like a battlefield. The smear campaign was getting dirtier. Every hour, new headlines twisted half-truths into full-blown character assassinations. But what they didn't know was that Julian had been here before. He had survived worse. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The door behind him opened quietly. Maya stepped in, holding her phone with an unreadable look. "Julian," she said, "you need to see this." He turned slowly, already bracing himself. "They went after your father." Julian's jaw tensed. "What?" "They published a story claiming your father was dishonorably discharged, said he was part of a money laundering scheme during his service in the 80s. It's completely baseless, but it's out there now." Julian's voice dropped. "That man wore his uniform until the day he died. He took a second job cleaning classrooms just to make sure I never skipped a school trip. And now they drag him through the mud for what? To keep a hotel chain from admitting they were racist." Maya didn't speak. She just placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "They're trying to provoke you," she said. "They want you to lash out, lose control." "I'm not lashing out," he replied, voice steady. "I'm going to finish what I started." Later that night, Julian requested a meeting with Carlton Holdings' legal team. It wasn't about lawsuits or settlements. It was war. The meeting took place in a sleek glass conference room at a neutral location in Manhattan. The air was cold, professional. On one side sat Julian and Maya. On the other, 3 senior attorneys in expensive suits, and Carlton's CEO, William Penn, a silver-haired man with a polished smile and the eyes of a chess player. Penn leaned back, fingers steepled. "Mr. Moore, I assume you've come to negotiate." Julian met his gaze, unmoved. "No, I came to offer you one last chance." Penn raised an eyebrow. "To do what? To come clean?" "Publicly, admit what happened at your hotel. Admit this wasn't a one-time incident. Fire the employees involved, launch an independent audit of your staff training practices, and fund a national awareness campaign led by the very people you humiliated." The lawyers whispered among themselves, clearly stunned by the demand. Penn chuckled. "You must be joking." "I never joke about $3.8 billion, Julian said. That made Penn sit up. Julian continued. "You've been pushing for a merger with my company for nearly 6 months. You want the access, the markets, the brand reputation. I was ready to sign off this week, but after what happened, I rescinded that deal. I have backup partners now, ones who treat people with respect." "You'd walk away from billions because your ego was bruised?" Penn said. Maya stepped in sharply. "It wasn't ego. It was dignity, something your company clearly doesn't value." Penn's expression hardened. "Then you'll regret it. We'll bury you in PR blowback. Your name will be synonymous with instability." Julian leaned forward. "You're not listening. I already walked away. You don't get to threaten me with consequences I've already accepted. But you're still vulnerable." He slid a small folder across the table. Inside were photos, statements, and a timeline, painstakingly compiled by Maya and a team of independent investigators. A former manager admitting racial quotas in guest complaints. Email chains from staff mocking black card holders as a joke. Security footage of a Latino family denied access to the pool, despite being guests. Penn's face slowly drained of color. "You release this. It'll hurt you too," he said. "You were involved in this deal. People will question your judgment." Julian stood. "Then let them." "I'd rather be questioned for trusting too easily than remembered for selling out too cheap." He turned to leave. "You've got 48 hours. After that, this goes public." Back in the car, Maya looked at him. "That was a big move." He nodded. "We're done playing defense." The next morning, Carlton Holdings issued a half-hearted press release, an internal review, a promise to explore unconscious bias training, and a vague nod to recent misunderstandings. Julian didn't wait. He went live again, this time with the stories of every victim projected behind him on a screen. No names blurred, no truth softened, and then came the twist no one saw coming. A whistleblower from inside Carlton contacted Maya, an IT employee named Jordan Nguyen. He had evidence that top executives knew about the incidents. They had actively suppressed complaints to maintain their diversity scorecards for investors. Jordan offered the emails, audio recordings, and internal memos in exchange for legal protection and a promise from Julian. "I want to testify," Jordan said. "But only if this actually leads to change." Julian looked him dead in the eyes. "Then help me burn the whole thing down and rebuild something better." With that, the real storm began. By nightfall, networks were requesting exclusive interviews. Senators called for investigations. Carlton's stock plummeted, and for the first time in decades, the luxury hotel industry felt the tremors of accountability. But Julian wasn't done yet. He had one more move, and it would send shockwaves through every boardroom in America. The next morning, headlines across every major outlet exploded with scandal. Carlton Holdings' new whistleblower leaks internal racism cover-up. Black billionaire Julian Moore exposes luxury hotel giant in 3.8B fallout. Julian didn't flinch.
The moment was bigger than him now. It wasn't just about what happened in that lobby or how they laughed at his card. It was about every person who ever walked into a place they could afford and still got treated like they didn't belong.
At his office in Brooklyn, Julian gathered with Maya, Jordan Nguyen, the whistleblower, and his legal team. Coffee cups lined the table, and exhausted eyes stared at laptop screens filled with damning evidence. Jordan had risked everything to bring the truth to light. He hadn't slept in 2 days. "I didn't come forward for fame," Jordan said. "I've got a wife." "A kid. I just got tired of watching people get hurt while I looked away." Julian nodded. "You did the right thing. Now let's make sure it counts." That afternoon, they submitted a formal report to the Department of Justice, backed by statements from other employees Jordan had quietly contacted. Several were ready to go public. The case was growing. But Carlton wasn't done. In a desperate attempt to regain control, the company launched a counterattack. A series of anonymous posts surfaced online, claiming Julian had doctored the evidence and paid off the whistleblower. They even circulated a deepfake video trying to discredit his image. Maya barged into Julian's office with her phone. "They just posted this." "It's already trending." Julian took one look at the manipulated footage and closed his eyes. "They're going full scorched earth." Maya's voice trembled. "Julian, they could actually get people to believe this." He opened his laptop and pulled up a file. "Then we give them something they can't twist." He clicked play. It was a raw video taken years ago, Julian visiting a youth center he funded anonymously in Newark. A young boy, maybe 12, looked up at him and asked, "Why do you help people who don't even know you?" Julian smiled in the video. "Because I was them. I know what it's like to be invisible." Maya watched, her throat tightening. "This was never about me," he said. "It's about giving them a voice." Hours later, Julian went live again. No press team. No filters. Just him, sitting in front of a camera. "I don't need a reputation that depends on lies. I have the receipts, the truth, and more than anything, I have the people behind me." "Carlton Holdings wants to play dirty. Fine, but this isn't going away. This is just the beginning." He dropped the files, unedited, uncensored, on a public portal. And then something unexpected happened. Dozens of people who had stayed at Carlton Properties began sharing their own experiences, videos, texts, emails, photos. From California to Florida, the floodgates opened. Stories poured in. An Indian-American couple denied access to the rooftop bar on their honeymoon. A disabled Navy veteran refused a room because the clerk didn't trust the ID. A black doctor humiliated in front of his colleagues when asked to prove he had the right suite. Julian and Maya watched it all in stunned silence. Then Maya whispered, "They thought this was just your story, but it's all of ours." The turning point came when one of Carlton's former executives, Diane Herschel, publicly resigned and posted her resignation letter online. It read, "I've sat in boardrooms where jokes about guests' names were laughed at, and where complaints from people of color were ignored because they always play the race card. I was silent too long. I won't be anymore." The internet erupted. Suddenly, the story wasn't about Julian the billionaire. It was about accountability. It was about a system cracking. But just when Julian thought the movement was peaking, he got a phone call. It wasn't from the press. It was from a young woman named Letitia Harper, Jordan Nguyen's co-worker. "He's in trouble," she said, breathless. "Jordan just got picked up by two plainclothes guys outside our building. They didn't show badges, just said they were doing an internal review. He looked terrified. Julian's blood ran cold. Maya grabbed her coat. If they're trying to silence the whistleblower, we need to move. Now. They contacted their lawyers, filed for emergency protection, and called every news outlet they had ties to. Hours later, they found Jordan in a back room at a small security firm, shaken but unharmed. The so-called review was an intimidation tactic by Carlton's private contractors. Julian stood in front of the cameras that night. I was going to make this about one hotel, but now I see. It's about every institution that thinks they can silence truth with fear. To Carlton, and any company like them, hear me clearly, you messed with the wrong man. And now, the entire country is watching. The room went silent. The cameras rolled. And for the first time in a long time, Julian Moore saw something he hadn't seen in himself since his father passed. Fire. It was no longer about defending his name. It was about changing the game. Julian stood inside the grand marble atrium of the federal courthouse, tall and composed, but with a fire in his chest. The room buzzed with energy. Activists, reporters, attorneys, all holding their breath. This was no longer just a scandal. It was a reckoning. Outside, crowds chanted, holding signs, "We belong to," "Justice is black," and "No more silent luxury." The energy was electric. Julian's decision to file a federal civil rights lawsuit against Carlton Holdings had turned into a national moment. But just as the hearing was about to begin, Maya rushed into the room, her face pale. "They've brought in a new legal team," she whispered, "and you're not going to believe who's leading it." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Martin Vale," she said. "The same attorney who tried to cover up the police corruption case in Baltimore. He's a fixer." Julian exhaled slowly. They're scared. In the courtroom, Martin Vale walked in with that smug confidence only years of protecting the powerful could buy. He locked eyes with Julian and smirked like he had already won. But Julian wasn't the same man who stood alone in that hotel lobby weeks ago. The hearing began. Carlton's team presented their first line of defense: deny everything. The video footage was inconclusive, the testimonies influenced by media, and Julian, they claimed, had a personal vendetta against the brand. Vale stood and spoke as if rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a billionaire exploiting a moment, turning a misunderstanding into a media circus. Let's not confuse activism with opportunism." Julian didn't flinch. When his turn came, he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked calmly to the stand. "I didn't need this lawsuit," he said. "I've had money longer than I've had peace. What I needed was justice, not just for me, but for the people who look like me, who get laughed at, turned away, dismissed every single day." He paused, then pulled out a series of laminated customer complaint letters, submitted quietly to Carlton over the years. Each one from people of color, each one ignored. "These aren't just my receipts," he said. "They're America's." Then came the twist no one saw coming. Jordan Nguyen, still recovering from the intimidation attempt, walked into the courtroom with Letitia Harper beside him. And behind them, unexpectedly, was Diane Herschel, the former Carlton executive who had publicly resigned. Vale objected instantly. "Your Honor, these witnesses were not disclosed." The judge leaned forward. "They've been cleared. Proceed." Diane took the stand first. Her voice didn't shake. "I was part of the machine. I knew what we were doing. We categorized guests by race, made assumptions, denied upgrades, refused bookings. And we were told to never, ever write it down. Nothing traceable, they said." The courtroom froze. Then came Letitia's turn. "I saw Jordan get taken away. I watched them try to scare him into silence. They weren't worried about the truth. They were scared it would finally come out." Julian looked over and saw Vale's confidence slip. For the first time, his eyes flickered with doubt. But the final blow came when the court allowed the release of Carlton's internal Slack messages. Jordan had screen captured them all before leaving. In one thread, a manager had written, "Didn't think that dude was actually a billionaire. His card looked fake as hell. Laughed so hard when front desk stalled him."
Bet he's used to that.
A collective gasp filled the courtroom. The words echoed like a punch to the gut. The judge called for recess. Outside in the hallway, Maya turned to Julian. "They just lost the public. It's over." Julian nodded. But he didn't look triumphant. He looked tired, like he'd been carrying the weight of 10 stories on his back. "It's not over," he said. "It's just beginning." That night, social media exploded. Celebrities, activists, even rival CEOs shared the courtroom footage. Julian Moore trended for 12 straight hours. But the most powerful moment wasn't a headline. It was a handwritten note left anonymously at the courthouse steps. It read, "You didn't just walk into that hotel for yourself, you walked in for all of us." Julian read it 3 times and smiled, finally. Not because he'd won, but because for the first time, he knew he wasn't alone. The verdict was minutes away. Julian sat motionless in the front row of the courtroom, flanked by Maya and his legal team. Cameras had been barred from the final session, but the entire country seemed to hold its breath. Even the protesters outside had gone quiet. The judge returned from chambers, face unreadable. Papers shuffled, a gavel struck. "In the matter of Moore versus Carlton Holdings," the judge announced, "the court finds in favor of the plaintiff." The room erupted. Julian didn't move. Not at first. He just closed his eyes, exhaled, and let the weight fall from his shoulders. Cheers rang out. People hugged. Reporters sprinted for the exits to break the story. But he stayed still. Because justice, when you've been denied it long enough, doesn't hit you like a celebration. It hits you like silence, finally being broken. Carlton Holdings was ordered to pay $35 million in damages. But more than that, the ruling mandated an overhaul of the company's guest treatment policy, quarterly racial bias audits, and public apologies aired nationwide. It was unprecedented, and yet for Julian, it still wasn't enough. Outside, the press waited eagerly. As Julian stepped into the sunlight, microphones rushed toward him. "Mr. Moore, how does it feel to win?" He didn't hesitate. "I didn't come here to win," he said. "I came here to change something. Money doesn't heal the humiliation, but maybe, just maybe, this decision makes the next front desk clerk think twice before laughing at someone who looks like me." He paused. "And if it doesn't, we'll be right back here again." Later that night, Julian walked back into the same hotel lobby where it had all started. The lighting was just as soft, the scent of polished wood and citrus lingering in the air. But this time, the staff didn't hesitate. They stood. They straightened up, and they greeted him by name. He walked past them, not to gloat, but to reclaim the space. Maya joined him in the bar, where they ordered the same drink as before. Except this time, it arrived without a smirk or a delay. As they sipped quietly, a man in his late 60s approached, clearly nervous. "I just wanted to say," he began, voice trembling, "I was one of the people who watched the hotel footage, and I used to think this stuff wasn't real. What you did, it changed me. Thank you." Julian smiled warmly and nodded. "That's why we do it." And then, one final twist unfolded. From across the room, an older black woman in a sharp navy suit stood, watching. She made her way over and introduced herself. "My name is Cynthia Brooks. I sit on the board of the National Hospitality Equity Commission.
We've been looking for someone to help us restructure how luxury hospitality deals with race. You interested? Julian glanced at Maya. Then back at Cynthia. Only if we start with this hotel. They laughed. A month later, Julian Moore declined a $3.8 billion acquisition deal from Carlton's parent company, a deal he had been privately brokering for months, citing a misalignment of values. It sent shockwaves through Wall Street. But to Julian, it wasn't about the money. It was about power, and using it right. In the end, his story wasn't just about a billionaire being mistreated. It was about what happens when someone with power refuses to stay silent and chooses to stand up not just for himself, but for those who don't have the mic, the millions, or the media. Before the story faded from the news cycle, Julian released a personal video on his social media. If this happened to me, with money, with influence, imagine what happens to folks who have none of that. We can't just call this a one-off. It's systemic, and it needs to end. So, I'm investing in a new initiative, Justice Guest, a platform for people to report discrimination in hospitality. No more silence. No more pretending it doesn't happen. He stared straight into the camera. We're not invisible, and we're not waiting anymore. The screen faded to black, with his signature below it. Julian Moore. And for the millions watching, something shifted. This wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of a movement,